Okay, here's the French and Indian War Part 2. And I didn't want to rush through the effects of the Peace of Paris and the end of the last video because these effects are really important. So like if there's any notes you've been taking on this, you should be taking notes on this slide right here. Pause it and write some of this down because it's significant, right? Basically, it removed France from North America. Now, technically, land west of the Mississippi River was still French, but it wasn't really yet settled, and France eventually gave it to Spain anyway. And Great Britain emerged as the dominant power in North America and as the leading naval power in the world. So, internationally, very significant as well. Also develops now is friction between the colonies and Britain, which actually begins during the war. Colonies emerged from the war with increased confidence in their military strength, right? Because it was the colonies over here fighting it, not so much, though there were some British troops coming over to fighting it. The colonial military leaders were angry that few Americans were promoted in the British Army, and that the American officers were treated poorly when compared to the British officers. The British were also upset with American shipping they traded with Spanish and French in the West Indies. They said, this is when you should start just trading with us. You see this as a cause of the revolution pretty soon. And eventually the British forbade exporting all their supplies from New England and the middle colonies during the end of the war. Some colonials refused to even supply the troops because they saw it as a different issue. Okay, and now a big one here as well is that American westward colonial expansion increased after the war. The French barrier west of the Appalachians wasn't there anymore. In some areas, the Spanish and the Indian threats were removed. And also, settlers no longer depended on the British as much to protect them on the frontiers. They were now more able to protect themselves. Oops. Okay, other effects and other notable things. There's about 1 million deaths in total from all the sides combined in the war. That's really, really significant. Not as many as, say, World War I or World War II, but at this time period, and it's not mechanized war yet, that's a big deal. It actually began in what's now Pennsylvania, so that's pretty interesting. Something that George Washington said, which is pretty famous, is that Virginia is a country young at war. He noticed this when he had a failure, obviously, in the Ohio River Valley. But it also became concern as we led to our revolution. And, we did struggle militarily for a large part of that. Also, something during the war is changing relationships with natives as well. Different groups here were created to help smooth things out. And you know what? I realized nowhere in the slide did it actually say when the war was fought, besides when you see that 1755 outside Fort William Henry. So the war was fought between 1754 and 1763. So keep that in mind with what we've learning about when the settlements came here. Keep in mind about how it's not much far before our revolution as well. So this is a quick PowerPoint, but I just figured I'd show you a few things. I did visit Fort Ticonderoga this summer, and I have lots of slides on it, and I'm not going to show you them all. But before it was Fort Ticonderoga, if you look over here, it was involved in the French and Indian War. And it was known as Fort Carillon at that time, where more than 8,000 French, Canadian, and Native forces left here to attack the British Fort Henry, which is the one from Lake George, basically down the other side of this big lake. It mentions here on this timeline that on July 8th, and it was America's bloodiest battle until the Civil War. About 16,000 British troops suffered casualties and about 2,000 French. I'll just show you a few things, which I thought were sort of neat. Before it was they had all this brick and mortar, so to speak. Some of it was literally just defended with sharpened sticks and wove with all sorts of vines. This is a French term, gabion, and this is something people could make hastily for defense. They would fill it in the middle with like dirt and things like that. So in case if it was shot with, something, hopefully it wouldn't penetrate. They also had this statue here about the natives that fought near Fort Carillon for the French and Indian War. They were sort of too far away for their weapons to be effective, but they were there willing to fight. This is just an image of some of the artillery overlooking the lake. And I think I have one more. Oops, I thought I had one more, but I don't. But we can always learn more about that if you wish. So highlights, things you should know. Keep in mind that this was the most significant colonial war, how it raised Britain's status as the dominant country in North America and as the dominant naval power in the world. Keep in mind how it did create some tensions between the British and the colonies, as money later had to be raised through taxes to the colonials to help pay for what they put into this war. Statutory neglect, where the British sort of let the colonies do their thing afterwards, how the issue of should colonies unite or not became an issue, how it changed the ability to move west is significant. And it also begins to make more significant the military career of George Washington. So there's a lot of notable things from this war and why you should know about it. All right, we'll talk about this in class.